Welcome to the Mobile Ecosystem Forum podcast, Perspectives in Mobile. The podcast where we look into the most pressing issues, trends, and innovation shaping the mobile landscape today. In this special series, we look at how companies are managing change in the digital era. This series is supported by netnumber.
Welcome to a new episode of Math Podcast series Perspectives, in which experts and industry leaders talk about what they think, see, and expect in the world of technology, telecommunications, and innovative mobile services. Management change and digitalization are probably the main challenges for business in our time, which is a time when the speed of change has become exponential. We'll talk about it with our guest. He is the leading authority on digital transformation and one of the proponents of as a business superpower. He authored the Adapt Manifesto. I think that Greg Verdino is the best person to talk with when we talk about management change. So thank you for being for joining us today, Greg.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Greg, if you close your eyes for a couple of seconds and try to reopen it in the future, let's say 10 years from now, what do you see?
Oh, geez. I think what's interesting is I think typically when people do that kind of an exercise, they assume that there will be a linear path from today to a decade from now. And I think one of the most important things for business leaders to understand is that in a world of exponential change, we shouldn't expect that linear progression that we're used to. So I think we are certainly going to see, 100 years of change in the next 10 years, from the proliferation of technologies like artificial intelligence and augmented reality, and perhaps the emergence of viable quantum computing systems where we will have technologies that are far more powerful than anything that we're even considering today, given everything that we're looking at. And in the process, a lot of the rules for business will be very different from the way they are today. I think it's going, a lot of this technology change will cause us to rethink the way we structure our companies, our operating models, our financial models, the way we think about the workforce, which will be machine-human hybrid increasingly, and even potentially whether or not economically we have to move into a world of post-capitalism or even post-work sometime over the course of the next decade.
What's the main risk in this time of turbulence for businesses?
This may seem like a cop-out, but the main risk, as far as I'm concerned, is having a very low tolerance for risk. I think organizations need to really kind of up their risk tolerance, become more comfortable. Leaders in the organizations need to become more uncomfortable with facing uncertainty and making decisions in the face of that uncertainty. And I think the organizations that retrench in the face of exponential change and volatility and uncertainty and ambiguity will be the organizations that find themselves struggling to keep up with that change and falling behind their peers.
Right. But why do we resist to change? I mean, is what you were saying? So we don't like risks. That's why.
Yeah, I think I'm not a biologist or a psychologist, but I do think that as humans, we tend to be risk adverse. It is a survival mechanism for us, right, to avoid unnecessary or serious risks. And, I think for a lot of people, it's just kind of wired into the way we think, the way we behave, and then ultimately we bring it to the office and the way we work. At the same time, of course, when you look at it at the organizational level, many organizations over the course of the sort of industrial era got used to this idea of, kind of finding that sort of product market fit, becoming really good, and just operate, right? Just do the same thing over and over and over again to repeatedly and reliably scale the business. And I think that kind of thinking and that kind of business behavior has just become ingrained in our operating models.
Right. Is becoming digital the solution? That's pretty simple. You buy the
Right.
machines, you learn how to use them, and that's it. So easy.
I'll say it's part of the solution, but I think the fact that it is, or at least seems so easy, has caused organizations and the people that run them to over-index on the digitalization or digital transformation process from a technology standpoint. Yes, of course, you need to adopt new technologies and integrate them into the way you do business and the way work happens in your company and the way you engage with customers and all of that. But when organizations adopt new technologies, when they digitize, it's more important. I was going to say as important, but it's really more important that they think about the non-technological factors, right? Digital transformation is human transformation. It's being driven by the humans that we call customers or consumers in a lot of cases. And it's essential that the organizational culture shifts, because people will resist the implementation of digital systems if they don't understand the benefits of those systems, how those systems will change their position and their role inside an organization, and whether the implementation of systems might be detrimental to their role inside organizations. AI is a perfect example. If organizations aren't clearly communicating why they're implementing AI, how they're implementing AI, what they're doing to upskill and reskill their workforce to better use AI, then naturally the people in the organization will become fearful, right? They'll have fear, they'll have uncertainty, they'll have doubt, they'll read all the stuff we're all reading in magazines, newspapers, websites, whatever, about how technology like AI may replace human workers, and they will become disengaged with the work they do and may in fact stand in the way of technological information. So the answer is not technology or digital per se. The answer is really how organizations bring their human workforce along and evolve their culture in a way that allows that organization to make use of the digital tools.
Talking about AI, how to create a strategic advantage using it.
So, I think, I think I've almost skirted around that a little bit, right? So, so far from what I'm seeing in my work, a lot of the work that organizations are doing around AI tends to be at least in 2023, tended to be very experimental. There were a lot of sort of tactical pilots using, frankly, many consumer grade tools like the right off the shelf, free or close to free ChatGPT or something like that, that people were bringing in to experiment with how they might use those tools to do their work. That's not a recipe for success long term. In the near term, in the face of a sudden innovation like that, yes, experiment, put your fingers on the keyboard, play with it, learn what it's like. But that's not a long term strategy for success. As we're moving into 2024, organizations are getting more serious about how technology and tools like AI can create that strategic advantage. So first and foremost, it is recognizing that AI is a means, not the end in itself. It is just a tool, like any of the other tools that we avail ourselves of. It might be a very powerful tool. It might have a lot of capabilities. It might, in some cases, even seem mind-blowing, right? But at the end of the day, it is still just a business tool
Mm.
when it comes
You
to the workplace. That's number one. I would say then you've got to really be clear about what are your objectives as a company, right? And how do you ground anything you do with AI in achieving those objectives, right? Define clear use cases, pilot them, measure them, and then scale them.
I mean, can we try and anticipate things using AI. And we have a so for that. I mean, is it how, because it's essential when things change rapidly. We need to try and anticipate change, probably.
Yeah, was your question? I'm sorry. Was the question how do we
Yeah.
anticipate?
Yeah. What's the secret if you have one?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a secret, and maybe that's a good thing that it's not a secret. So, I think anybody that were to tell you today that they, maybe some elite AI researchers might have an idea, but even they can't agree. Anyone like me, a business person who might tell you they know where AI will lead is probably not being entirely honest with you. That's the secret. And the truth is, you need to remain agile and adaptable, right? So you do need to embrace these tools as they become available, but do so in a way that's focused, that minimizes, and I know we need to be more risk tolerant, but you don't want to add undue risk into your organization by using these tools without proper governance, for example, without proper policies, guidelines, defined practices that give people the ability to you kind of play with them, but within a frame that keeps them safe, the organization safe, minimizes reputational risk, financial risk, and that kind of stuff. So I think in the early days, sort of the first step towards anticipating where these things might go is actually using the tools. And what I find is a lot of business leaders can't, or won't make the time to actually use the tools themselves. They feel like that can be delegated out to others, but leaders need to build that technological or digital literacy, at least to a certain point. So that's number one. And then as you use those tools, think about what does this make possible? How does this make my job easier? How does it make my business, how might it evolve over time to make my business model different? You need to read a lot. You need to listen a lot, to podcasts like this one, for example, and really see what are experts talking about and how are the different scenarios playing out. And then you need to keep in your mind the possibility that no single scenario is going to be right. So if you think about the sort of the basic premise of scenario planning, where you might hold multiple possible future scenarios in your head at the same time, and kind of understand, like, there might be an AI nirvana, there might be an AI dystopia, there might be anything in between, and recognize that those are both possibilities and anything in between is a possibility, and think about, how do I position my organization to be most successful regardless of which of those futures becomes real. And I think that's part of the essential sort of process and practice for business leaders who want to maintain the right level of agility and adaptability and resilience as they move into a future where there is this kind of uncertainty.
So preparation is anticipation. That's what we're saying, more or less. And you wrote about adaptivity. You wrote a manifesto, a pamphlet. What? Why did you do that? I mean, it's like a kind of a philosophical statement, or it's just practical. I mean,
So
what was your
it's
intention there?
So it's some of both. So when a colleague and I we developed the Adapt Manifesto together, a gentleman named Ian Patterson in the UK, and we were both independent digital transformation consultants working with a wide variety of different organizations, for profit, nonprofit, education, healthcare, associations, government, like really all across the spectrum. And what we noticed, and there was a lot of literature about this stuff too, that the vast majority of transformation initiatives had been deemed unsuccessful. I believe it was McKinsey or maybe BCG, one of the large consultancies, did a study, and they found 70% of all transformation initiatives were failing to meet their core objectives. And I don't know if it made us good consultants or bad consultants, but we were seeing the same kind of thing.
I see.
And what we started to do was we put our heads together. We started to look at sort of the patterns we were seeing across our projects that differentiated the more successful organizations from the less successful organizations. And we identified in that process a set of sort of best practices, so to speak, that were present in the successful organizations that were lagging or are not present at all in the less successful organizations. And we said, you know what, we're onto something here. There are a set of basic principles that pretty much any organization can adhere to if they want to increase the likelihood of their transformation success. So that led to the creation of the manifesto. And instead of calling it the Transformation Manifesto, we went with the Adapt or Adaptation Manifesto, because one of the things we recognized was that even with the largest organizations, when they try to transform too much too quickly, those transformation initiatives tend to crumble under their own weight. And that the more successful organizations were the ones who didn't wait until the last minute where they had to transform everything all at once, but had this always on sort of state of change readiness and were adapting what felt like a little bit, one small step at a time. But over time, those small steps were adding up to massive transformation and success for the organization. So we kind of landed on this idea of adaptability being more important than the ability to execute a one-time transformation.
Ability. And you were talking about transformation here. Probably you prefer adaptability, but we're talking about human transformation. That reminds me of a very recent Neuralink, Elon Musk's company experiment. I mean, not even experiment, as far as they said it was an operation, so not an experiment. Hopefully, right. Is it something to do with human transformation? I mean, like an interaction with PCs or internet, or what's your take on this kind of experiment?
I mean, I'll say this. I personally would not want Elon Musk implanting a chip in my head, but that's just me. I think, when you see developments like that, we're certainly beginning to see a lot more blurring between humanity and technology, and we're going to see much, much more of that moving forward. I don't know that I don't necessarily prescribe to the notion of, or I'm not looking forward to the idea of transhumanism, the idea that we will transcend our biological human state and become one with the technology. I believe that at least my preferred future is one in which people maintain their humanity and that our human I guess the capabilities, the competencies, the intelligences that make us uniquely human, right? Things like empathy and critical thinking and all that kind of stuff. That those things you kind of are what differentiate us even into the future. The things that machines don't do quite so well. That said, I think we do need to recognize that there will certainly be a portion of our population that is going to embrace this idea of transhumanism. I'm sure it will be the upper echelons from a financial standpoint that will do things like embed chips in their brain to have more direct, communication with machines. May look at uploading consciousness into the cloud, that kind of stuff. Things that sound ridiculous. We'll be embracing things like gene editing and all sorts of genomic science to live longer, to combat disease in ways that we can't combat today, which then runs the risk, obviously, of creating a much, much greater digital divide between the haves and the have-nots.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyway, something we need to take in account for the future. Another note that I customers. What do the customers expect from businessmen, from businesses, and from the men that manage businesses in this era of change?
Yeah. So I think fundamentally what I see, and I wrote I ghost wrote a book. I guess it's 2 years ago now. I can't say what the book was since I wasn't credited as the author. But actually, the book was about the evolution of customer experience, both at the time in a sort of post-COVID world and how that might evolve over time. So I've done a fair amount of research into the area, and in some ways, it at least on paper, it is very simple, right? Customers expect organizations to be more responsive than they've always been, to be present and active across all of the many, for the most part, digital touch points that the modern consumer uses. The idea of business hours, right, where your customer support center can be, telephone primarily and available 9 to 5, right? Those days are gone. People expect that you're going to engage with them online through mobile, using humans, using chatbots, using whatever tools you have available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, that you will be fast, responsive, you will resolve their issues quickly and seamlessly. That, of course, trickles out and becomes fundamental to not just customer service and support, but the entire experience, right? Amazon created this premise, that like it's almost like the now customer, right? Everything is now. You order it, it arrives. There's no friction. There's no question. You know exactly where your package is. You know exactly when it's going to show up on your doorstep, right? And that's the world we live in now. And there is I think it's incumbent upon organizations to understand that, to get very clear about mapping the consumer journey or the customer journey, understanding exactly how your customers behave and what their expectations are and the steps they go through when they make decisions about who to do business with, and to sort of organize the business around those kinds of customer needs. And then, of course, now, again, getting back to technology, the technology then provides them with the tool set to deliver upon the promise.
Yeah, but basically you don't need surveys anymore. You have AI to try and understand what customers want, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, I mean, I'm not going to say you don't need surveys, period, right? There is, of course, benefit to getting firsthand information, but certainly artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, machine learning, social listening even, right, allow you to have a much more accurate, potentially near real-time read on what your customers are actually doing. That's important. And then however you're gathering data, whether it's through those kinds of systems or you're running traditional surveys or it's, reps on the phone or whatever is going on in your particular organization, there's a tremendous amount of unstructured data that comes out of that process as well. So using AI to identify patterns that a human might miss in a massive data set becomes an incredibly powerful strategic asset for an organization.
Last question, Greg, and is the question that businessmen are asking themselves and MEF sometimes: how to thrive in an era of what it's a definition, I don't know if you like it, but consistent disruption. I mean, it's disruptive, but it's consistent.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
So
How to thrive in an era like that?
Sure. So I think there are a few things. And, again, I think maybe one of the running themes of our conversation is that it's not technology first, it's human first, right? So the first thing is sort of this idea of embracing that ambiguity. A lot of organizations will retrench, a lot of leaders will kind of stick to their knitting, do what's safe and in their mind predictable when the world around them is uncertain. Try to control what they can control because the uncertainty is too great. And I think you need to kind of move beyond that mindset and really embrace the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the unpredictability, the idea that disruption is constant and coming from all directions, because that embracing that uncertainty sets you up to kind of at least have the right mindset for change readiness. I think being a student of the change that's happening, and this is an Adapt Manifesto principle, being a student of change, read widely, suck in information. Many leaders are really, really smart about what's happening in their own organization and in their immediate competitive set, but then get blindsided when change comes from outside the industry, or there's a disruptive innovator who enters their sector, or even just a technological change, or it could be an economic change or a social change or whatever, but even a technological change that they weren't expecting, they weren't seeing, they had written it off as too far in the future or too insignificant. So studying what's happening more broadly and thinking about how it applies to your business, it's critical. And I think the other thing, and this is sort of stolen, I suppose, I'll say borrowed from the futurist Alvin Toffler, is this idea of learning, unlearning, and relearning. That there are so many assumptions that we make about our own organization, our own industry, what it takes to succeed. But all of those assumptions are based on the current state at best, the past in many cases. And again, with the idea that, our path to the future is not going to be linear. It will be fraught with disruptions, and change will be exponential, and like the path will be discontinuous, essentially. It's critical that we understand when is it time to give up those assumptions, to unlearn things that we thought were critical skill sets or mindsets or behaviors or whatever, that have done our organizations well so far but don't serve us into the future, and learn new skill sets and mindsets and behaviors that are more appropriate for the future.
So readiness, preparation, adaptability, these are probably, and the human factor is more important than technology.
Absolutely. You can't write off the technology tools. You need to understand them and play with them and work with them. But that's not enough on its own.
Thank you very much, Greg. That's all for this episode of Perspectives.
Thanks for listening to Perspectives in Mobile. This episode was part of a 6-part series on managing change in the digital era, supported by netnumber, the source of high-quality data on phone number portability, fraud prevention data, and signaling and routing control. Stay tuned, stay connected, and join us next for more insights and discussions.